Hi, today I'd like to talk about how we can really start to supercharge our practice. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning pianists, or indeed anybody who loves piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it's your first trip here, then please do think about subscribing. Simply hit the little icon in the bottom right hand corner of your screen now, and it's all done for you. Regular viewers of my channel will know that I'm on a bit of a personal mission to find ways of practicing more effectively. My theory being the more effectively I practice, the better player I'm likely to become in the time that I've got. And indeed, I've done lots of research on the topic. I've found great channels on YouTube such as Josh Wright and Paul Barton, where you'll find excellent tips on how to practice things. I also found Graham Fitch's eBook series that is brilliant, and I'm in fact a member of Graham's online academy on the internet. And of course, I try to then take all of these tips and ideas and quite often combine them into different things so that I can use them in my own practice sessions. The reason I've spent such a long time studying how to practice is because I find that a lot of the mainstream advice you see seems really limiting to me. I don't know if you're on many online groups, but for example, almost every time somebody asks for ideas of how to practice something, the stock advice of slow right down, use a metronome comes up, and I sort of roll my eyes, to be honest. And that's not because that's bad advice per se. Of course, slowing something down using a metronome, these are great ways to practice, but surely there has to be more varied ways that we can make progress than just these things. However, I do have to admit that despite all the research I've done, more often than not, I'll end up practicing quite narrowly myself by using rhythms for absolutely everything. And whilst this is a fantastic technique in itself, it's not necessarily always the best way to practice a specific piece of music or a specific problem. However, I think, found a way to actually supercharge our practice, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. The idea first came to me when I was reading Neuhaus' book, The Art of Piano Playing. Now, to paraphrase him, he said that the book is aimed at the average piano teacher and the average piano student. So not exclusively at conservatory level or virtuoso type people who are learning. As a result, I find a lot of the things that he says are very worth consideration, and you might initially overlook them. So for example, he likens hand-separate practice, believe it or not, to the emergency exit in a theatre. So something that needs to be there, but it should only really be used in an emergency, and it's not for everyday use. And I know some people might even gasp at that kind of idea. Yet I've often found myself using techniques such as hands separate for a very extended period on the same piece, sometimes learning almost an entire piece hand by hand before trying to put it together. Even when I've practiced in sections, I've tended to have sections that have been fairly long, and therefore I've spent a long time practicing using different techniques such as rhythms or slow practice or whatever it may be. This then led me to come to the conclusion, in fact, that doing this was not really heading straight for the goal as Neuhaus says we need to do. Of course, to make matters worse, when I practice in this way, if I want to go from stage A to B, so let's say stage A is practicing hands separately to stage B of playing both hands together, then it's not simply a case of just putting both hands together, because it doesn't work as easily as that, does it? Working on the idea then that the goal is to get to the point where we're able to practice something at the speed we want to play, with the dynamics we want to use, with the phrasing we want to use, with the pedaling we expect to use, then of course doing this for an entire piece of music and getting to that point is an extremely long process for some pieces. However, if heading straight for the goal means that we need to get to this point so we're practicing as we want to be able to perform it, then of course, surely that's going to be an unbridgeable gap for a lot of pieces that we learn. However, after some experimentation, I found that it is in fact possible to do this with a little bit of careful planning. This then is what I'm referring to as being able to supercharge our practice, so that we're not actually using any one practice technique for an extended period. Rather, we're getting everything up to a good point as quickly as we possibly can. What I mean by careful planning is first working out what it is we think is going to be difficult. With any specific piece, different people are going to find different things difficult, aren't they? So for example, for some people, keeping time is just no problem at all. So what then is the point of practicing that with a metronome? If you can already keep time, then why have this click, click, click just to keep up to for no real point? Other people, like myself, might struggle with speed. Yet there are people such as Martha Argerich. I remember her in an interview saying that for her, speed was really not a problem for her. In fact, if anything, she could always play things far too fast. So of course, if she wants to bring something up to speed, the way she would approach it would be very different than the way I might need to approach it. However, in the same interview, she also talked about the fact that for her, octaves were always the challenge. Yet we know anecdotally that for Vladimir Horowitz, octaves never seemed to be a problem. So even amongst two pianistic giants, the way they might work on an octave section would be very, very different. So why would it be any different for the rest of us? You know, we need to work out what it is we find hard and then work on strategies to deal with that. To give an example, I've always had a bit of a mental block with speed. And in fact, it's not only on the piano. I noticed with brass instruments, because I play brass instruments and I used to play a lot in my youth, I could never play at quite the same speeds as a lot of my fellow players could. So this being the case, when I recently re-picked up Chopin's Minute Waltz, I had to re-examine how I was going to approach it. I mean, the last time I learned it, I did all of the usual things. I spent lots of time practicing it hands separately. I spent lots of time using rhythms. I used my 4/4 waltz technique and a variety of things. And to be honest, it sort of worked well enough. I mean, I got to the point where I could actually play it, you know, quite respectably-ish for me anyway, but I couldn't always get it reliably, so it could be a little hit and miss. So given all of this, I thought if I need to head straight for the goal, then perhaps the thing to do is to isolate individual bars or phrases so that I can work these up to a, let's say, performance type standard as quickly as I possibly can. And that way I can spend more time actually practicing them as I want to be able to play them in the future. And of course, to do this, I did all of the same things. I used rhythms, I used my 4/4 waltz, I did a bit of hands separately, I did some hands together, but I did it in such a way that I didn't keep going further on in the piece. I just stuck to the 2 bars, if you like, that were my goal for the time. And I found that, in fact, you can bring a couple of bars up to a reasonable standard in quite a short time, all things considered. And of course, once I got my first section okay, I moved on to next section, which I overlapped a bit with the previous one, and used exactly the same approach with that until I felt that I was able to play that in a nice, relaxed way and be perfectly in control all the time. And then sticking the 2 together isn't that difficult afterwards. I mean, you might need to go backwards a little bit and use a little bit of hands separately or a little bit of slow practice for a limited time as you get this longer piece under control. The reason I think this is so powerful is because it gets us to the point that we're actually playing something as written as fast as possible. I mean, from a certain viewpoint, while we're in the problem-solving domain, we're in the slow practice, the hands separate, the rhythms, the drilling tiny sections, then this is not practicing how we want to play the piece in the future. It's merely trying to get ourselves to the point that we'll be able to practice it. And therefore, the faster we can get to that point, surely the better. After all, it's only once we can comfortably control all of those notes that we're in the real realms of perfect practice makes perfect. Give this a try for yourself and see how you get on. As I said, I think the key really is to get to the point where you're able to practice as written as quickly as possible, even if that's only for a smaller section. And don't forget that often in any piece, if you've got a material that repeats itself often as you get in the minute walls, then the way you might want to perform one individual 2-bar section might vary from repetition to repetition. So therefore you're able to practice in a variety of different ways, even with just these 2 bars, and focus really on the kind of speed or phrasing or articulations that you might want to use in a specific repetition of it. Now, if you're not already, then please do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to click that little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I thank you very much for watching and look forward to seeing you very soon.